Welcome to Inside the Issues. I'm Amrit Singh. Tonight's show is sort of a theme show, and that theme is tariffs, theme of a lot of the news and headlines and the economic movement these days. Tomorrow is the first day of 25% tariffs on all steel and aluminum imported to the United States. Today, the White House said those fees would double on imports of Canadian metals. Then the White House reversed course a few hours later. President Donald Trump spoke about the impact of tariffs today at the Business Roundtable quarterly meeting. Had an interesting take. Take a listen.
Hundreds of billions of dollars is being invested. That wouldn't have happened if I didn't win the election, number one. And I think, number two, the tariffs are having a tremendously positive impact. They will have, and they are having.
Well, it's a conversation about whether they will in the future. As far as whether they're having a positive impact now, investors sounded off. And as you can see, they went to the red. Dow down about almost 500 points. NASDAQ and S&P 500 down not as much, but S&P 500 did hit correction territory briefly today, which means down 10% off its most recent high. A conversation about where the stock market is going and also if it's in fact a mood ring as to where investors feel like it's going as well. Daniel Grimes takes a closer look at the various tariff announcements from the White House and also the response from U.S. trading partners.
The Premier of Ontario called a truce late Tuesday, dropping his plan to impose a 25% surcharge on the electricity the province sells to 3 U.S. states.
He's not going to do that. Okay, he's not going to do that. And it would have been a very bad thing if he did, and he's not going to do that, so I respect that.
The Ontario Premier, Doug Ford, also said he would meet with Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick on Thursday to explore ending the budding trade war between the two countries. The Premier backed down after President Donald Trump said he would double to 50% tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum imports on Wednesday in retaliation for the electricity surcharge. After Ford raised the white flag, the White House said the president would back off as well, withdrawing his plan to double tariffs on selected metals. But the president still reiterated his calls for Canada to become the 51st state, a push that Canadian officials consider a provocation. The tariff whiplash fueled new fears on Wall Street about the economy because tariffs typically lead to price hikes, reducing consumer purchases. On Wall Street, stocks sold off for another day, extending a month-long slump.
This trade chaos, in my view, is like a big anchor around the American economy.
Now, still on the table, President Trump's threat to impose tariffs on cars coming into the country if Canada does not abandon charges it imposes on agricultural and dairy products. That is likely to be a topic when American and Canadian officials meet on Thursday. In Washington, Daniel Grimes, Spectrum News.
Tariffs are top of mind for everyone, and as we see the stock market go down as it has over the last 2 weeks, it's a conversation about where it's all headed. And joining us now is someone who understands consumer sentiment and consumers' feelings about where everything is going. It is Leo Feler, chief economist at Numerator. Leo, great to have you. Thanks so much for taking some time. A busy quarter, to say the least, for folks in your field.
Amrit, thanks so much for having me. It's a very uncertain quarter for folks in my field.
It really is, and I know that you had put together a lot of materials at the top of the year talking about the state of the economy and the way the fundamentals were looking going into 2025. You said it was all very strong. Been a very interesting quarter with a lot of policy changes, which has shaken up the markets, to say the least, and also uncertainty about trade. I suppose just give us the state of the economy as you're seeing it now since your prognosis at the beginning of the year, and how consumers are feeling about it all.
Sure. Going into 2025, the economy was actually doing really well. It was normalizing. Growth was normalizing at around 2%. Inflation was normalizing slightly above 2%. Now we're getting a lot more concerns that the economy might see a little bit more of an adjustment, more of a shock during these coming 2 quarters. And, potentially with higher inflation as well related to tariffs. A lot of this is just companies being uncertain about whether or not to invest, given that they don't know what will happen with tariffs in the short term and the long term. Does that justify new investments? We're also seeing consumers getting more and more concerned about potential layoffs. So when we asked this question 2 months ago, about 21% of consumers said that they were moderately or very concerned that they would lose their job during the next 6 months. Now that number is 29%. And so really this is starting to eat into how consumers are willing to go out and spend if they have more and more concern over time that they might not have a job 6 months from now.
And obviously, we know that when consumers aren't spending money, that has a deleterious impact on the macroeconomic conditions. But just talk about it in terms of percentage. I mean, most recently I heard something like over 60% of the economy is consumer spending. And if you see those kinds of numbers as you do and people start to pull back, what kinds of impacts does that have on the stock market, but also just the general sense of inflation and economy and everything moving forward into Q2 and Q3?
Right. So the consumer is the hallmark of the American economy, right? About 2/3 of our economy is consumer spending. And if the consumer suddenly starts feeling anxious that they might be seeing, more news about layoffs, especially government-run layoffs in the news, they start getting concerned about how will their industry be affected. And ultimately, this doesn't just affect federal government workers, it also affects companies that might benefit from government spending. So think about this in the context of defense contractors, right? Defense contractors might suddenly be concerned that they're not going to be, receiving as much funding if we're not giving aid to our NATO partners towards Ukraine. That might mean less funding for defense contractors. You really have a much bigger spillover than just on federal workers themselves. And this is part of the reason I think we're seeing such a bigger share of the American workforce saying they are now increasingly concerned about having a job 6 months from now. What that then means is that people actually start cutting back on going out to restaurants, on traveling. We started seeing this right now with Delta Airlines reporting, with Kohl's reporting, that they're actually giving forecasts for slower consumer demand in this coming year. If this actually all starts happening, if we all start believing that the economy is slowing and we start pulling back today, then this is a self-fulfilling prophecy. The economy does actually slow down and we do actually enter a potential recession going forward.
It's so interesting to think about the ways in which our beliefs and attitudes wind up actually manifesting into the economic conditions that we may be scared of in the first place, which is what you're talking about, the self-fulfilling sort of prophecy of economic conditions and the concerns about what might be available from a job standpoint, if not from a financial standpoint. And so when we look at the market now, a lot of this is investors being concerned about the uncertainty around tariffs, and there's certain sectors, in particular automobiles, maybe NVIDIA and these chips, that are concerned that it's going to impact their bottom lines as well. How often do we see the kind of sell-off we've been seeing recently being correlated to a recession that actually is unfolding?
So we get sell-offs all the time. It doesn't necessarily mean that a recession is imminent, that a recession is going to happen. But in this case, the market is actually saying, hold on, right? We are really concerned about what's happening. Things are very uncertain. We are getting signals anyway that the economy was normalizing. Now we're getting signals that we might be throwing sand into the gears of the economy. And so these high valuations that we had in the stock market, going into 2025 don't seem justified. Right, we're still above the levels of stock indices that we were in August of last year, so it hasn't been that deep of a crash over these past few weeks. But we are substantially below the highs of February, and this might actually also play into consumer sentiment, because think about the higher income households who look at their stock portfolios and say, you know what, I can go out and take that vacation. I can go out and buy that car because my stock portfolios are doing okay. They are now looking at their stock portfolios and saying, hold on, I might actually need to be able to save up more for retirement because my stock portfolios don't look so good. Let me hold back on consumption. And so there's this wealth effect dynamic that as stock values start coming down, consumers also start retrenching. Businesses, when they see the value of their stocks coming down, they also might decide, I'm not going to invest quite as much as I was planning to. I'm not going to hire as much as I was planning to. And so again, there can be a self-fulfilling prophecy. And we just have to wait and see if this is a blip, if there might be a reversal in some of these trade shocks, these trade wars that we're getting right now. Maybe everything will be okay. This won't actually translate into a recession. But right now, we're just in the middle of a little bit of uncertainty and a little bit of chaos. And that makes it very difficult for businesses and consumers to plan.
And that's exactly why forecasting, as you do with the consumer sentiment survey that you're actively engaged in right now in Numerator, is so important, because those attitudes about the future wind up shaping, if not the present, then the future economic conditions and the recessions. One of the things that folks are talking about, Leo Feler, I know you know that well. We'll leave it to your work, and we'll hope to talk to you when we get more of that consumer sentiment information. We really appreciate you being here and bringing it to us tonight.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Leo Feler, talking about some of the uncertain economic conditions that we're experiencing right now, which may explain not just the reds we're seeing on Wall Street, but also potentially some of the pullbacks, if and only in attitude, if not in dollars and cents from consumers. More coming up. We are coming down to the wire on government funding. March 14th is when the current funding expires. House Republicans have been working on a stopgap bill, and they could lose just one vote in their vote today. And they did lose one Republican vote, but a Democrat stepped in to support the continuing resolution. Now that measure moves to the Senate, where it needs bipartisan support to pass before Friday's deadline. Cassie Simeon has that story from Washington.
Congress is now one step closer to preventing a partial government shutdown Friday night. The House voted largely along party lines Tuesday evening to approve Republican legislation to keep the government funded for 6 more months.
Now that the government funding bill has been passed out of the House, we send it to the Senate, and it falls on the desk of Chuck Schumer.
The bill largely maintains spending at current levels, except for a $6 billion increase for the Pentagon and a $13 billion cut in domestic spending. It also contains an increase in funding for immigration enforcement and a freeze in some funding for the IRS, both priorities of the president. Just one Democrat supported the measure, Congressman Jared Golden, who represents a swing district in Maine. Democrats were otherwise against the measure because it would not curb the ongoing effort by President Donald Trump and his billionaire ally Elon Musk to slash the federal workforce and spending.
The partisan Republican spending bill will hurt everyday Americans, and House Democrats will never be complicit in their reckless scheme.
Kentucky Congressman Thomas Massie, who routinely opposes spending bills, was the only Republican no vote, chiding hardline conservatives who routinely vote no on spending bills but voted yes Tuesday at President Trump's request.
We're going to find out what a stinker it is when you get like 10 or 15 Democrats over there to vote for something that the Freedom Caucus endorsed over here.
Senate Democrats now face a political dilemma. If they defeat the bill, they could be blamed for a government shutdown. If they allow it to pass, they'll continue to give President Trump a free hand to slash federal spending. At least 8 Senate Democrats must vote yes to allow the bill to move to the president's desk. In Washington, Cassie Simeon, Spectrum News.
Thank you for watching our YouTube channel. Let Spectrum News be your resource for balanced, in-depth political coverage, and click the subscribe button right here. You can also download our app or watch us on TV to learn more about the candidates, where they stand on the issues, and more. We'll see you then.